I just feel like getting to know you just a little bit this year. Like this is just.
How did you transfer design?
So it's all about pressure, moisture, and heat. So the cloth is prepared to receive the dye with metal mordants, and then you put the leaves on, and then these were rolled onto a stick. I love it. I'll tell her.
Did you get every picture you wanted of it?
Well, you can't actually capture it, but I didn't want to forget it. So.
I was really curious if they had all these dyes and then different plants, you know, they have
Pretty cool if they made it.
I know.
Someone magical, I think.
Seems like most everybody uses their phones.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Gosh, it's such a beautiful day.
What could you say about like geography and place, that why that happened here? Or what is it that this region contributes to that being receptive in that way?
Well, you know, of course, this area has a long history of worker activism, and you know, the Finnish socialists, and there were some of the earliest worker-owned businesses in the state were in Astoria. So there was a big plywood mill that was owned and operated as a worker co-op. There was the fishermen formed a co-op and started their own cannery because they weren't getting fair treatment from the corporate-owned canneries, and that was all happening, you know, 100 years ago here. And so I think that for a rural area, it's incredibly rare for a worker co-op to survive. I think it's not a coincidence that it's happening in a place that has a historical precedence for it. There tends to be an increase in worker ownership during times of economic upheaval. And so I think that because of the economic upheaval as a result of the pandemic, I would be very surprised if there weren't more worker-owned businesses at least trying to make a go of it. People have to have their own experiences and figure out stuff on their own, but we can help each other. We you know, like I think about all the people that I have learned from, like everything you learn, it's like the standing on the shoulders of giants thing, you know? It's like if I can like help somebody else make one less mistake than I've made, like what a gift. I mean, life is so messy, you know, and you can't everyone's gonna make mistakes, but like if you can it's like, hey, there's some quicksand over there, you know, like if you can just let people, you know, if anyone can benefit in any way, the world would be better. I think that both making art but also teaching, I really enjoy that process of teaching creative process. I feel that for me, in my art, the materials themselves are a really big presence in the work. They're the process of creating it, and the materials themselves, particularly the plant colors, is really almost it's a really big part of most of my work. Working with plants embeds this whole layer of meaning for me.
How so?
Because I feel like the plants are really wise. Yeah, I feel like they are so they are offering, every plant, they have these different compounds in them that create color. Many of them are also healing plants. And I think that by observing them, by growing them, by foraging them, and paying attention, sometimes I get gifted from them, not just the color, but also messages. They're not like talking in my head, but it's just like by example. Like for instance, indigo is really generous, but it's also really, really complex, and it teaches me patience. It teaches me observation. It teaches me to kind of discipline. And one of the things about indigo is that, unlike most other dyes, you can create these crisp boundaries to where the dye will go and not go. And by stitching, by applying clay, by applying clamps, you can say, I want indigo here but not here. And so you can create these design elements on the cloth in a way with indigo that you can't so easily with other, which is like, it's like modeling how good boundaries create clarity and beauty and like spaciousness of possibility. This is what happens when you have good boundaries. So it's like anytime I'm utilizing indigo, I'm playing with some of those themes. And like anytime I'm working with madder red, there's a whole nother narrative inside of myself of what I believe is the wisdom that plant offers me.
What are the boundaries that madder brings to?
So madder is really interesting because it's this, many people would know, they might not know what the madder plant looks like, but they might know what cleavers or lady's bedstraw looks like. It's a common weed in North America. It has like a little whorl. Another one is sweet woodruff. People grow in their gardens in the shade. And they have prickly leaves, and you can like stick it to yourself. Like kids, when I did nature walks, they called it Velcro plant. So that's the same family as madder. And so madder's like that, but only it's bigger. And it's also another really, really old dye. And it has indigo, you're extracting this one pigment. Madder contains, in a mature plant, contains close to 20 different dyes within its root. But that's only after it's been grown for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years. And so one of the things that madder teaches is patience, and that just the unquestionable, it takes how long it takes. Does that mean that madder is a less valuable dye than cosmos, which you can start a seed and grow with it, 14 weeks later, no, it's just like it takes how long it takes. And the dye process itself is also slower than a lot of other dyes. And if you want red, it is very specific what you need to do. Because there's all these other dyes within it. So if you want red, you have to meet the requirements. Again, it's like really clear. It's like, I can't get too hot. It'll be better if you ferment it for a while. It'll be better if you wash the roots. It'll be, there's all these things that you can do to get that clear, bright red. And historically, like my Irish ancestors, paired it with other plants for that dye process to make that red. And so it has these, I like to think of madder as the queen, and she has her ladies in waiting for support. And when she has the support that she needs, she can do this amazing thing that no other plant can do.
And then maybe forced retirement. I'm kind of enjoying it. I've started doing charcoal.
So madder teaches that it's really good to know what you need. It's totally great to ask for the help that you need to succeed in doing what you want to do. And to be patient with yourself, that it takes however long it takes. And the only ruler to measure yourself against is your inner self. Like, not, you can't use the same like checklist. Is matter good? If you try to use the same checklist as you do for indigo, it's just inappropriate. It's apples and oranges. It's, I've been playing with natural dyes for over 25 years. It's so, I've seen students be able to engage with the plants, after, people, I think we're hardwired to connect to plants if we have permission to kind of just feel into that. I think we evolved with plants. They're much older than us, and so when people can get access and permission, I think that people get their own. The plants can offer us what we need. And we're probably, other people might get something different if they observe matter or indigo or weld. They're going to get their own meaningful story from it by, just practicing in some way. I don't feel like necessarily that what the stories that I receive are these universal truths that anyone would tap into and they would get exactly the same thing. I think it's just, but I think that people could, when given opportunity, we will connect to nature. And our society doesn't support that. Our society says that it's all in your head. Our society undermines that connection because it makes it easier to control. So, but if given the opportunity and the access, I believe people just naturally can connect to nature.
Well, yeah, I think you talked about how indigo was synthesized in the 19th century, or?
Yeah, so very, very end of the 1890s. They figured it out, but it took a while to figure out how to manufacture it. So they figured it out, how to synthesize it, and then so it was in the 1890s, but it took about 10 years to phase out natural indigo. And indigo has that's a whole nother, colonialism and how it's tied to indigo all over the world and the suffering, and there's a lot to unpack in the indigo story. Before synthesizing it was used to fund basically colonialization. So many of that people were enslaved from Africa and brought to the Americas for the purpose of growing indigo. Sometimes because they had expertise, because there was a intact indigo tradition. People in India and the the British occupation of India was there was a lot of human suffering resulted from turning it into this huge commercial product that got sent around the world. But people had traditionally if you look at 1200 around the world, they were indigo traditions all over the world. There were indigo traditions in North America, Central America, South America, Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe. Because there's multiple plants that contain it, and people figured out that one plant on their continent, and they figured out all that crazy stuff, and so it was a known desirable thing because it's unique in nature to have a pure blue. The synthetic indigo process is very polluting to create it, even though it creates the same molecule. People haven't figured out how to, plants make it, and I can throw my indigo plants in my compost and put it in my garden, and and it's totally fine, but like they use cyanide in the manufacturing of synthetic indigo, and the synthetic reducing agents they use in industrial dyeing with indigo are very polluting. So, blue jeans, there's like 1 billion pairs, maybe. I mean, like it's a huge industry, and very, very costly as far as environmental impact and the health of the workers and all of that.
But I didn't know it would work. So,
Yes, totally.
So
The best
so-
way, well, that's what you want to kind of do what you. So I think that slow textiles have, and reassigning what the value of slow textiles and handmade, and getting away from fast fashion. That's, I feel like, that indigo, and encouraging people to grow indigo, even if people have one thing that they have that is from natural, that they know the source of it, that's a potential to change the paradigm. Like several years ago, there were a couple of particularly heinous sweatshop instances where a lot of textile workers were killed, and as a result of that, there is really a worldwide movement to raise awareness around the human and environmental impact of industrialized consumerism. So I think that because of that, there are these kind of started in Northern California, but called a fiber shed, and trying to how can we create cloth locally? And those fiber shed organizations are blossoming around the world, where people are not trying to completely replace all of the infrastructure. Though I do kind of feel like, how many clothes, why do we need to replace our clothes every year? Like, why do people need to do that? Like, it's not like practically, it's not actually necessary. So like, we could consume a lot less and still be dressed in ways that are pleasing to us, So it's like, who benefits from excess consumerism? It's like the cost to us as individuals is like, we have to work more in order to buy more, and like, so I think the social costs of it are actually really high. So, just even, it's like, it's a shifting of the mind is what's needed, and then that will shift everything else. Like when I took that break from doing art for a period of time, when I left in like 2006, 2007, and wasn't really active talking to other artists and dyers, the world of natural dyeing was very small, like hundreds of people in the U.S. probably. But then when I started coming back and like interacting, it's so huge. Like in the last 5 years, probably 10 or more books have been published about it. There's like, it's so huge. It's like, wow, like I never saw that coming. So there's cotton grown in California. There's a group growing. There's an Oregon Northwest fiber shed that's working on renewing linen production in the state of Oregon, which has a history of growing linen, and Oregon still produces quite a bit of wool. So we actually have wool manufacturing is still happening in this part of the world. But I have been able to use local wool in some other work.
This is predominantly cotton.
This tent here is silk. Most things are cotton, and that's actually U.S. grown. I used a ton of this color-grown gingham in a bunch of different parts of the show because I had a huge bolt of it, and that was U.S. grown and U.S. woven. They were growing cotton in the Americas and in Asia before contact. Like they both had cotton, which I think is kind of wild because that was a lot of breeding. Yeah, for sure.
So it's definitely that.
There's a lot of misery embedded in the cotton industry as well. And hemp is another really good. Historically, it was used for textiles extensively in Eurasia. So like that's another fiber that we can totally grow here easily.
You've kind of chartered us through some rough waters, and you've been on the ride for quite a while.
It's exciting. It's totally exciting because it's like I remember like being in school and learning, but I did that big privilege thing and got a degree. So like, but learning about the living treasures of craftsmen in Japan. And like while I was in school, the last living maker of stencil paper for making katazome, a form of applying paste through a stencil to create pattern on cloth. The last living maker of this very special paper that was preserved with fermented persimmon juice and then smoked, and like this whole very elaborate process to make this very exquisite, perfect for the task material, died. And then that's it. Like that is gone forever. Like people might be able to kind of like figure it out, but like somebody that learned through an apprentice program and spent years perfecting their craft. And as a weaver, being very aware that skill is most easily passed on. Like I have an aunt, I got to learn how to weave when I was a child. So like, and I taught both of my sons, and one is gonna be a weaver, but like, as far as like on the worldwide scale, it's like, wow, this could all be gone. And it's like trying to learn these handcraft skills from a book or from looking at something and trying to figure out how they did it. It's really, really, really difficult, so like it's very exciting for me that anyone does any handwork. So, I did my degree at U of O, and that my final year I was actually had 8 shows. And then we moved to Astoria, and I started, and I was doing at least one, I was in the faculty show at the college every year, and I was doing, the AVA was doing a show every year, so I was still doing those. And then, my kids, I had my children, and I was still doing stuff. And then my close friend died, and that coincided with a big shift in my life. Like around that kind of spurred me to like start doing more, like I tried to do like a little craft business with my dyeing and less focus on like art-based things. And then the bakery got started, and that was like so consuming. And I was homeschooling my kids, so it was really I think it was really connected to like I had a number of people die in a pretty short period of time, and I think it just kind of made me more like kind of circle my wagons more, and then in that circled kind of like contracted space, I started some non-art projects that were just so consuming. And so it wasn't really until I got sick 7 years ago and stepped back from those projects that I was like, oh, dude, like I so want to be doing art. And so it took me a few years. And so like that was about 4 years ago now that I was like, oh wait, I got what's my actual priority? My actual priority is that I want to be doing art. And so that's kind of like that 20-year period. It was 17 years ago that my good friend, so I guess, but to have a solo show, I haven't done that since college.
You went on a journey yourself and explored the difference between creativity and death.
Yeah, I do feel like it seems to me now that I can like that that process of kind of grief, and then having the opportunity or the calling to re-enter that state, it's a very altered state of consciousness. And I think that it really shifted my perspective, and I feel like in a metaphysical way, what is my role? Like, what do I want to be doing on the planet? I think it puts me in a position to be able to be more compassionate than I would have if I hadn't had those experiences. So I think that can also, and also it hopefully helps me to be less ego, like to be more. I think being a parent also like really takes out of the equation this thought that you are how much you're influencing the world, like, and how much the world is just, you're just part of the world. Instead of seeking to be like changing the world, seeking more to sink into and be part of the world.
Like, I think you said that in your blog that it was like 2 years ago you felt like you were coming out of that fog of the treatment.
Yes, I that changed the treatments for, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I did, and I was pretty young, so they gave me really pretty, and I was healthy. So they really maximized the dosage for some of the drugs that I received in the Western medicine treatments. So I think that because standard of care is such that it's like based on your body weight and age and all that, it was out of sync with what my body could actually process, and I think that's why I had, I think that I had more, I had some significant neurological impact. The last 7 years are very much a blur in some ways. Like, there's a lot of gaps. There's tons and tons of gaps. Like, I still, like, just the other day, my son had these cool socks on. I was like, oh, wow, where'd you get those socks? And he's like, oh, somebody gave them to me. And I'm like, oh, who? And he's like, you gave them to me. Like, you got these for me. Like, and I still don't remember giving them to him. I did a thing where I did the Western treatments, but in parallel, I did a lot of complementary medicine. So I actually still see the naturopath that does traditional Chinese medicine in Portland. It's now I go every about 3 months, but so it was really an interesting compare and contrast between a very personalized whole self approach and standard of care. Like, and I absolutely chose to do standard of care for several reasons, but I see that, there's a lot of blind spots in that. It's like health is like the entire sky, and any method of healing someone is kind of like a telescope looking at the sky. And so Western medicine has a pretty powerful telescope, but it can't see the whole sky at once. It just can't. It's like human limitation. And I think that, so it's true. Like, I think that I'm very fortunate that I had a statistically improbably good outcome for my diagnosis. And I'm very grateful for that. And it changed me in profound ways. Like, I have neuropathy in my hands, and as a fiber artist, to not be able to tell the difference between my cotton dress, the rug, the silk, the wooden floor, is a pretty profound difference. And that's part of like the neurological thing. So like, but it's healing. It's just nerve healing is really, really, really slow. I think it will continue to shift and change over the rest of my life. But I mean, my sensitivity in my fingers is better than it was 2 years ago. I've been trying to do this thing where I talk about intention. Like, when I pet my cat, I try to really concentrate on any sensation I'm having when I pet my cat. Like, or and if I'm just like hanging out, I do more fussing with my fingers than I did before. Like just trying to stimulate those nerves and try to notice and pay attention and strengthen anything that I'm doing. And my dexterity was really impinged, or damaged originally. And so trying to do things that require my dexterity to re-practice and retrain those pathways in my hands. I mean, I think the interesting thing about memory shifting and memory loss is that like my pre-memories are still pretty intact. Like I can access like stuff from 7 years ago more easily than stuff in this time period. And so like I remember what it feels like. You like go to thrift stores and you're looking, you can just kind of feel the garment. You can tell if it has any acrylic in it or not. I mean, old me could do that, new me can't. And so I think being able to, like, for when I'm in a studio situation or a classroom situation, and it's like, okay, what are, like trying to have people be able to tell, it's like, oh, well, this is silk. And so it's not cotton, it's silk. And it's like, how does that feel different? And so it's like, I can access old me's perceptions of like, well, there's a certain warmth to it that a similar weave of cotton would feel cooler. So silk feels just slightly warmer somehow than cotton does. And I think that has to do with the polarity of the molecules, actually. The subtle things are like, are what leads you to understanding somehow. I do think that families are like a energetic system. It's so, yeah, there's so much like, I mean, in this show, I think in a lot of ways is about connecting to lineage and healing through lineages and like how that all works. Like somehow there is an energetic transmission that happens through generations. And maybe that's epigenetics, I'm not sure.
What are some of the threads that the viewer would pick up to take that journey?
Let's see. So the theme of time, like trying to depict time with the year of Sundays, which is a calendar of 7 years. So that like trying to physically represent a period of time. And just kind of like, like what if time was manifest as a physical object? In the show, I have a quilt that's representing the 7 generations, and then there's another piece that's a cartoon for future work or work in progress that has the images of my great grandmother, her sister, and her sister-in-law.
We don't do that. So it's
to delineate this a temple within from an old photograph, and I think just for the viewer to represent, like looking at this picture from 1938 and realizing we're connected. It's like she died before I was born, but the other 2 women didn't. I get to meet them, and I of course knew her son, who was my grandfather, and I have stories of her from people that lived at the same time as her. So I have a direct information, and many people get to actually meet their great grandparents. It's not uncommon. So it's like the past kind of doesn't go anywhere. It's still with us. It's still like, just like our child self is still inside of us. Somehow they're still inside of us. I don't know how, but I feel like they are. So hopefully, I don't know, like hopefully it will help people think about their own lineage and what do they know about it and what can they find out about their ancestors, and think about what are we going to pass on. You know, like we're all passing on stuff to the next generation, whether or not we have children or not. Like we're all part of creating the world for the next generations. We are all ancestors, regardless of if we're, yeah, like, so like those three women, Martha, who's got the chickadee on her shoulder, is not biologically related to me, but she's still my ancestor. Like,